good morning, good evening, good afternoon, folks. It's V the Gorilla Economist coming to you live on this edition. I'm still struggling from yesterday, guys, so the tryptophan hasn't worn off. We're with Harley. Harley Schlanger's here. If you go check out his work, LaRouchePack.com and the SchillerInstitute.com as well. And with that being said, Harley, there's lots going on. Where do you want to begin, sir? And happy belated Thanksgiving, sir.
Well, thanks, V, and happy Thanksgiving to all your viewers and listeners. I think what we have to start on is these two events that occurred Wednesday that were really quite amazing. One was the filing in Georgia and Michigan of papers on vote fraud by Sidney Powell.
Yes.
And of course, the media says, oh, this is just a giant conspiracy theory. So the media, which somehow missed that Brennan and Clapper ran the biggest conspiracy theory story and fake story in history with Russiagate, they're missing the fact that Sidney Powell actually has a lot of evidence.
Yeah.
What she's pointing at is that the voting machine companies that were involved, in particular in the swing states, had both the capabilities to commit fraud and also the motives, because they were basically put in place by people who intended to commit fraud, and they're owned by people who are anti-Trump fraudsters.
Right.
So they had the capabilities and the motive. And we're going to have an international commission of inquiry tomorrow. The Schiller Institute is sponsoring it to bring together the evidence of what the capabilities are that the NSA, CIA, and others possess to rig elections, since they've done it in other countries. Now they're doing it in the US.
Yep.
So we'll have Bill Binney speaking, and then I'll be presenting the overview of what was done, the overview of what was done to rig the election by the same people who ran the Russiagate story. So that should be a very interesting thing. Now, the other thing that happened, of course, you had the pardon of Michael Flynn. And actually, there was a third thing, which was the Pennsylvania hearing,
Yes.
which was really quite interesting.
Huge.
I mean, the hearing there was a group of Republican state senators who were speaking on behalf of large numbers of their constituents. And when Trump called in to them, he said, "We caught the thieves. We got them before, and now we've got them again." And he said, "This is something that we will not rest until we fight it through." So our hearing tomorrow will be very significant. But I think what people have to be watching is that while this is going on, you have the people who control Biden putting together a war cabinet and a depression austerity cabinet. And you have the danger of false flag attacks around the world to put us on the brink of war, with the idea that Trump is the one who's supposedly the warmonger and Biden is the man of peace, which is a complete fraud.
It's ridiculous what's happening. Harley, how do you see these things playing out? I mean, I think the wheels are coming off of this phony, baloney, President-elect Biden nonsense. And based on what's happening with Trump, the evidence that both the Trump team is putting together with Giuliani, and also the asymmetrical moves that are being done both by Sidney Powell as well as Lynn Wood. And let us not forget that there are some covert operations that have occurred that have been confirmed, where off-site locations in Frankfurt and in Barcelona were hit. These were CIA safe houses that were hit. Lots of things going on. I think if I were Biden, especially now that the bombastic, earth-shattering, revelations, the things that are going to be pushed by Sidney Powell and the Trump team, if Biden was smart, he would concede right now, saying, "Hey, you know what? There's massive amounts of fraud. I'd concede for the sake of the country," but he's not going to, because number one, he's stupid, and number two, he's a psychopathic criminal.
Well, can't argue with that. But the interesting thing is we're looking at this presidential order that Trump tried to initiate in 2017, which was to look into the 2016 election, because Trump is convinced that he actually won the popular vote as well.
Yep.
And so who stopped him from having this commission to do that? Well, the very people who then worked to make sure they could rig this election.
Yeah.
So I think the important picture here is that if Sidney Powell is able to deliver on these with these witnesses and others, this is a crime so big that it will shake the foundations of absolutely everything that people believe about the United States. And not just here, but internationally, because we've gone into country after country. By we, I mean the CIA, the intelligence community, and run destabilization operations in country after country. And I just read a very interesting exchange that took place from the president of Mexico with a journalist. And he was asked, why haven't you congratulated Joe Biden yet? And he said, because they're still investigating fraud. And I know that fraud is committed in these presidential races because it was done to me. So that's from Lopez Obrador in Mexico. Then I saw an absolutely fascinating interview with Aliyev, the president of Azerbaijan, who's not a good guy, but he was being interviewed by a BBC uh, journalist who just kept asking him, what about suppression of freedom of press in your country? It's well known to non governmental organizations. Sources say you beat up journalists and you shut down the press. And he said, who are these sources? And the journalist said, well, we can't reveal that. And he said, well, let me ask you something. Have you ever heard of Julian Assange? Is he
No.
rotting away in a prison in your country? And she said, President Aliyev, let's get back to the question of Armenia and Azerbaijan. And he laughed and he said, I'm not surprised you want to change the subject away from Assange. So here you have the biggest hypocrites in the world
Correct.
who uh, accused Trump for 4 years of illegally occupying the office of the president. And now, when there's evidence that shows that they stole or they're trying to steal the election in 2020, the media won't touch it. In fact, they deny it. They say it's baseless. So, this, as I said, this is a crime that is so big, both because of if you can do this to the president of the United States, you can undermine any country in the world. But more importantly, if you put Biden in the office, you're putting us on a course toward World War III. It's a question of war and peace. And even people who don't necessarily like Donald Trump on the left, like Jimmy Dore and Aaron Mate and Max Blumenthal and Glenn Greenwald, are pointing to the absolute danger of these appointees by Biden. And they're a little bit horrified by it. So I think we're at a moment where we could see at least a short term alliance between the real progressives on the left who are anti CIA, anti vote fraud, and the Trump supporters. And that would be very interesting. And of course, I'm not talking about AOC, who's really in Pelosi's back pocket.
You know, when you look at Biden's appointees, it reads as the who's who of the most sycophantic brown noses I've ever seen. Guys who've literally achieved nothing. They're a bunch of nobodies and retreads, which also kind of, shows that either two things are happening. Number one, the real talent pool doesn't want, or they're not beating down the doors because they know what's going to happen with this Biden presidency. It's not going to go nowhere. He's not going to even touch foot inside the White House, and they already know it. That's why, guys like Diamond and Blankfein are not breaking down the doors to get into that Treasury Secretary post. Or these are the perfect idiots. I mean, look at his Secretary of State, the nominee Blinken. He's an idiot. He's a moron. He's a CIA. He's a CNN commentator, and he appeared on Sesame Street. Those are his highlights of his life. And they're picking this guy because you know what? He's also a perfect shell, an idiot, a psychopath, and people like that are easily manipulated. So this could be the perfect deep state setup, or they literally have no talent pool because nobody wants to be a part of what they're doing because they see the handwriting on the wall. This is a quote unquote presidency that'll never even leave the runway to get up into the air in the least bit, Harley.
Well, V, I disagree with you a little bit that these guys have never done anything or they're a bunch of idiots. I think they're psychopathic murderers.
Oh, yes, I agree with that.
Yeah,
Yes,
Tony
that I agree.
Blinken was a deputy assistant secretary of state. He was a top advisor to Biden when Biden was running the Ukraine operation, the Ukraine coup on behalf of Obama.
Yeah.
He was on the ground working with the Nazi Azov battalion and the Banderistas in Ukraine. He has this cover that he had a great or a grandfather, a step grandfather who escaped the Holocaust, and so he's so concerned about oppressive regimes. Yeah, he's so concerned that he works with Nazis to overthrow the Yanukovych regime in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Now, the possible and probable designate for Secretary of Defense, Michel Flournoy, goes back to the neocons from the Bill Clinton era of the Democratic Party, the ones who bombed the hell out of the Balkans. And she and Blinken are advocates of this idea of responsibility to protect, which is a Tony Blair idea, which basically says no sovereignty should get in the way of
Yeah,
what
it's
the deep
preemption
state
again.
needs. Yeah. So these guys have blood on their hands already. Blinken wanted to bomb the hell out of Syria. And when Obama left office, Blinken said his one regret is they didn't destroy the Assad government. Blinken called for invading the Crimea to throw the Russians out.
He's a psychopath. He's an insane idiot.
Yeah. So, but he's also a part of the inside grouping that will be running the Biden administration. Biden's a war hawk and he's a banker's boy, but he's only partly there.
Yep.
He's not going to be running much. But if you
No, it's
put
going to be Kamala.
well, if you put Blinken together with Michelle Flournoy, the two of them were partners in something called West Exec Advisors, which had as its clients all the top military industrial complex firms, and they were lobbyists. Now you have Avril Haines, who's coming in as the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence. Haines is very close to Gina Haspel and Brennan. She was the one who devised the legal justification for the drone strikes that Brennan and Obama did every Tuesday when they were blowing up weddings, and then the next day they'd blow up the funerals of the people who were at the weddings.
Hmm.
So then you think about Janet Yellen. Yellen is one of the closest US financial officials to Mark Carney of the Bank
Yeah.
of England.
Right.
And she and Carney share an obsessive commitment to funny money, bailing out banks, and the green policy. Then you had throw in John Kerry, who whatever he, to the extent that he ever was anything, it's all gone from him. He's nothing but a flunky for the globalists. He's sort of like a thinner Al Gore. So you've got a completely insane grouping that's being pulled together, and this is the continuation of the Bush Obama administrations.
Unbelievable. They're all a bunch of retreads. It's crazy, and I mean, the kill shot has to occur and has to occur soon. Harley, what do you think?
Well, I think I talked about this a little bit last week, but I saw Tulsi Gabbard picked up on it. Trump needs to bring Ed Snowden and Julian Assange back as part of his maneuvering to pardon them and get them to testify as to what this deep state really represents. Now, Snowden has a good part of the picture. It's not the whole picture, but you put together people like Ed Snowden with Bill Binney and Kirk Wiebe, Tom Drake, some of the whistleblowers, you've got an absolute picture of the way in which the big tech companies have been integrated into the military industrial complex
Absolutely.
to control the population. Then you bring in Assange, who can show that the people that Biden is bringing in, along with the Bush crowd and the rest of the Obama crowd, Madeleine Albright and others, were killers, that they went around the world destroying countries. Now, here's something that I think is important. I don't know if your listeners and viewers have heard this, but the current British Chancellor of the Exchequer made a very interesting statement yesterday. Now, this comes when the London Economist is calling for the British to revert to the East of Suez policy. In other words, go back to the Indo-Pacific region as a region of the British Empire. And they're talking about, well, they said they're going to send frigates into the South China Sea. They're going to mobilize the British military power.
What frigates? They have like 5 ships.
Well, they have a few rowboats and kayaks because
that's it. There's nothing left of the Royal Navy. Nothing.
Well, what they mean is the U.S. is going to do it for the Brits because the Chancellor of the Exchequer said that the British economy is in the worst shape in 300 years. And the figures he gave, many of them predated the coronavirus lockdown because you know the situation in London very well. The real estate speculation in the United States was second only to what was going on in London with the Canary Wharf and the office buildings, the luxury apartments. You had a bubble in 2008 that popped in the U.S. and in London. Those were the two places hardest hit. They never recovered in London because they never had any economics below that. Trump did something to create a little bit of a increase in manufacture, but the Brits have continued to collapse. So the idea that somehow we're going to see a new British Empire, the only way that happens is if Biden decides to walk around with the Union Jack on his lapel button.
I don't know. I mean, these people are literally out of their minds.
And when you have people that crazy running governments that have nuclear weapons, it's very dangerous.
I agree.
I saw a cartoon yesterday. There was a meme that was pretty funny. It was Biden wearing an apron, holding a turkey, and saying "Happy 4th of July."
Exactly. Exactly. I saw the same meme. It was hilarious. Harley, last minute thought. Any of the last minute things that you want to say, sir?
Well, I do think it's important to realize that coming from Russia, you have some sanity. Putin just convened several meetings, and he talked about how the Russians are going with a very big push in technology, not just in the military, but they're going to be developing nuclear power plants. They're going to be exploiting the area in Siberia with the strategic metals. That the Chinese are doing that. The Japanese were given a big offer from the British, and they said, well, we're going to work more with the Chinese right now. And of course, the Chinese economy is the only one in the world that's showing some growth levels again, because even though they did do a total shutdown around Corona, they have something still there as a manufacturing base to fall back on. And I'm afraid that you get Biden in there, and the minimal damage he'll do is ship the rest of U.S. industry over to China. But more importantly, there are countries around the world that are not going along with this craziness. Now, we'll see what happens. If Biden, I mean, I think Sidney Powell has a very interesting case. Giuliani, with all the mocking of him that's gone on, he actually put together a fairly clear picture of massive fraud that maybe by itself doesn't add up to overturning the election. But you put that together with what Powell called the quiet fraud that can be done through these computerized systems. And it's clear that this election has to be thrown back to Trump.
Yep.
So I think anything's possible in the next 2 weeks, because it's December 14th is when the Electoral College meets. There are hearings going on in 4 or 5 other states. There are legal cases. In Pennsylvania, the judge who threw out Giuliani's case, it was accepted by the appeals court.
Yeah.
Now they're trying to get the appeals court to do it on an expedited basis. And today they said they would do it on an expedited basis, which means if it's thrown out at the appeals court, it goes to the Supreme Court. So we'll be heading up very quickly to the mother of all confrontations in the Supreme Court. And what they're going to have to look at is how big a crime was committed, not just with the 2020 election, but the 4 years leading up to that.
Sure.
And so I think
they'd have to
There's
look at also the 2018 election that occurred where the Democrats gained the House.
Yeah. So I think people who are crying in their beer this Thanksgiving, saying it's all over, uh,
I think just begun.
hopefully they are listening to this and getting their shoes back on and getting ready to get back into the fight.
Absolutely, absolutely, very well said. Harley, thank you so much for joining us. Folks, again, subscribe, like, comment, and share. Check out Harley's work at LaRouchePack.com and TheSchillerInstitute.com as well. And with that being said, enjoy your weekends, enjoy your Fridays. CJ, take it away.